This is Glow in the Dark Radio. The science fiction podcast with original independent science fiction written and performed by Mike Luoma, with music by Kevin MacLeod. The Vatican Assassin Trilogy and The Adventures of Alibi Jones by Mike Luoma are available in ebook, trade paperback, and audiobook wherever you find your books online. Get links and details at glowinthedarkradio.com. This is the Science Fiction Podcast, Glow in the Dark Radio. I'm your host, your writer and reader, Mike Luoma, and we've got the finale of Vatican Abdicator and the Vatican Assassin Trilogy on this episode. It's Vatican Abdicator, Chapter 23, and the Epilogue on this episode of Glow in the Dark Radio. Well, it looks like BC, and all of humankind, really, have won the war. Dolomay, the dangerous ancient enemy, is dead. The Eldred are in retreat or dying. The Solar Alliance, created to fight the war, might even be solid enough to maintain itself. A democratic government for Earth and its colonies. BC is about to take a tour of the Solar Alliance. A victory lap? Well, maybe. Maybe not. It's the end of Vatican Abdicator and the Vatican Assassin Trilogy this week on Glow in the Dark Radio. So, what comes next? We're continuing in chronological order by getting into the adventures of Alibi Jones' Chronological Omnibus. That's all of Alibi Jones's stories and novels in order. And we're going to begin with 2 short stories next week. Father's Day is kind of a Rashomon look at the final chapter of Vatican Assassin through Alibi Jones's eyes. The final chapter of Vatican Assassin Trilogy, that is. And then we're going to get into Blind Eye. So 2 stories coming your way next week. Now, as I'm writing the next Alibi Jones novel, as chapters are done, I'll be sharing them with patrons as the regular Alibi Jones stories are playing out as the omnibus is unfolding here on the podcast. Now, this is all because we are celebrating the release of the Chronological Omnibus as an audiobook. 44 hours and 15 minutes, over 44 hours, with Alibi Jones. That's The Adventures of Alibi Jones, the Chronological Omnibus, now available as an audiobook at Audible, at Amazon, Apple, Kobo, Walmart, Google Play, Storytel if you're in Europe and Sweden, Nook, Barnes & Noble, it's at Barnes & Noble, and there's more to come. You know what's kind of wild, though, is the pricing is all over the place. I suggest shopping for it because it's kind of the Wild West pricing for audiobooks. I have no real control over it. It's crazy. Audible doesn't let me set a price. They just set their own price. And then I set a price for the distribution to the other places, and people just generally price it how they want anyway. So, okay. But it is out there now as we get ready to roll it out here on the podcast. Also, I should mention, also new, my professional work as an audiobook narrator. There is a new book out by Edgar Weiss, the 365 Positive Affirmations for Healing Anxious Attachment. So it's a day-by-day, year-long set of affirmations by Edgar Weiss that I am narrating. And it's an accompanying book or a partner to the audiobook I just narrated for Edgar, which is Healing Anxious Attachment. Just the book itself, Healing Anxious Attachment by Edgar Weiss. And those are out now through Audible and at Amazon. Some of my professional narration there on the audiobooks. And speaking of stuff I do other than this podcast and narrate my own work, I do the radio thing. You can hear me every weekday at noontime on WBKM.org, streaming online worldwide. Got friends in Australia, Israel, Europe, New Zealand, all over the world. And of course, here in the United States, over in the UK, all at WBKM.org. You can listen right there or get the WBKM app in the App Store. It's a radio station, an online station out of Burlington, Vermont. Well, before we get into the final chapter and the epilogue of Vatican Abdicator, the end of the Vatican Assassin Trilogy, I just want to say thank you once again to my patrons, because patrons help keep the podcast going. And it is my intention to get you some new Alibi Jones stuff if you are a patron. Some new chapters of the next book within the next month or so. I want to have something new for you as a reward for you sticking by me through, well, thick and thin, and for being a patron and supporting this podcast. Thank you once again for doing that. And if you want to find out more about becoming a patron, go to patreon.com/glowinthedarkradio. We have Chapter 23, the final chapter of Vatican Abdicator, and the epilogue coming up next on Glow in the Dark Radio.
50 years ago, Mira, humankind's last hope to find new resources, departed the solar system. 7 years into her mission, she disappeared. She has returned. SNR Black, a Sol Federation Marine Corps vessel, is sent to retrieve her from certain destruction in the Kuiper Belt beyond Pluto. What they find will change humankind forever. From Parsec award-winning author Paul E. Cooley, Derelict, Marines, Part 1 of the Derelict Saga, combines military sci-fi, space opera, mystery, and suspense to create a journey you won't forget. Podcast available at shadowpublications.com. Paperback and ebook available from amazon.com. Some mysteries shouldn't be solved.
Now here's Chapter 23 of Vatican Abdicator on Glow in the Dark Radio. BC decides to vacation at each colony, to spend a little time at all of humanity's homes over the course of the month, so the Prime Representative doesn't seem to be playing favorites. Anita puts the itinerary together for him, a skill she still has a knack for, but she won't be able to join him on his excursion. As she points out, she has political processes and elections to oversee on Ceres Central. BC finds himself on a shuttle to Earth, alone. As he begins his vacation, he's traveling with light security, 2 plainclothes SAIF officers. His first destination? Boston. BC is visiting the parish where he was first a priest in the new Catholic Church. He's trying to avoid crowds, but somehow word of his itinerary has leaked out. There are people milling about outside the church when BC arrives. He waves to them as he gets out of his transport, but then he makes a beeline for the church's front doors. St. Gabriel's Church was built sometime back in the 1900s. It's a grand old white wooden building with 2 square towers. The building's 2 longer sides are lined with rows of stained glass windows depicting the Passion of Christ. As BC climbs the white marble steps, he thinks back 10 years to when the NCC began, and he was transferred here. I knew I was in over my head at that point. I'd never set foot inside a real church before this place. BC opens the heavy wooden main doors at the front of the church and disappears into the darkness inside. He has his security detail wait outside as he tours the old white clapboard church. He wants to take it all in by himself, alone. They only agreed to wait when the local priest told them he could lock the doors behind BC, so he couldn't be disturbed. As BC enters the church foyer, he hears a slam and some clicking. The doors are closed and locked behind him. BC's eyes adjust as he walks through the foyer, through another set of heavy wooden double doors, and into the main hall of the church. He walks up the aisle towards the altar. BC is looking up at Jesus on the cross, at the crucifix suspended over the altar, when he hears the church's doors open behind him. Huh. Thought they were going to keep those locked. I told them I didn't want to be disturbed. BC turns to see a woman and a small child standing in the dim light of the foyer in front of the church doors. The two begin to walk forward. They pass through the stained glass-colored sunlight streaming in through the windows of the church as they walk up the aisle towards BC. There's something familiar about her. I thought I'd find you here, she says to BC as she approaches. She clutches her coat closed in front of her with one hand, while the small boy holds on to the other. Me? He asks. Hello, BC, the woman says, drawing closer. She stands beside him, with the small 2- or 3-year-old boy at her side. The priest was kind enough to let us in when I told him we were family, she says. BC stares into her big brown eyes, trying to remember who she is. You don't even remember who I am, do you? She says, seeing right through BC. I'm afraid I don't. You look familiar. We were once close, she says. She looks down at the boy. Quite close. Uh-oh. She shakes her head. This won't do at all, she says to herself more than BC. I was your alibi, she says to BC. She looks at the boy. His name is Alibi, she says, with an air of some sort of satisfaction. The boy has his mother's big brown eyes. He looks up at BC, but stays quiet. Alibi? Oh my God! Kim's daughter! Ruth! Kim said she was dead. You remember, she exclaims, and a weird smile creeps across her face. I thought you were dead. Your father told me you had died. BC remembers that Kim himself is dead now. I'm sorry about your father, he tells her. She frowns, and then looks down at the ground at her feet. You should be sorry, she says. She looks back up at BC. You have lots and lots to be sorry for, BC, she tells him, practically spitting out the word sorry. You ruined my father, my family, my faith, my home, my world, my life, you bastard! She stares eye to eye at him as she finishes. The boy at her side begins fidgeting, whimpering softly. BC sees frenetic energy dancing in her eyes as she lectures him. There is a weird edge to her voice, a strange chaotic craziness. I don't think she's all there anymore. She seems off. What can I say, Ruth? BC tries to sound calm and reassuring. She's lost it. She's not right. How do I call security without freaking her out? Nothing, she answers him. She looks down again. One of her hands still holds the hand of the boy. The other is inside of her coat. I thought she was holding it closed. What about the boy? BC has to ask. She looks up at BC, and then down at the boy. She bends down to talk to the boy face to face. Al, this man is your daddy. Alibi, meet your father. This is Bernard Campion, she says, and she and the boy both look up at BC. She straightens up. Is she sick? Holding her stomach? Are you okay? BC asks her. She ignores his question and begins to lecture him again. You've done a lot of bad things, BC, Ruth tells him. And I'm not talking now about what you did to me and my family and Fortune Station. I'm talking... She looks down and then back up at him. About the things my father told me about you. He told me all about you, BC. All the killing, the horrible things you'd done. She shakes her head. And now I see you all over the news. They're all saying such great things, such nice things about you, but none of it is true. Leader of the free world. And I've seen you with that woman. She trails off and looks back down at the floor. She glances at the boy and then looks back at BC. Rumors say you two are getting married. Is that right? Is that right? She asks in an accusatory tone. Well, I don't know about that. We haven't even talked about it, BC says defensively. You're a bad man, BC, she says angrily. She glares at him as she raises her voice. You don't. Good things should not happen to you. You don't deserve any of it. Her eyes burn into his. I've tried to make up for the bad, BC tells her. I've tried to do good things. I've saved the human race. That's got to count for something, he insists. You were lucky, she reasons. Lucky to be in the right place at the right time. You were lucky, not repentant. Have you repented? Really? I don't think so. You haven't atoned for your sins, Ruth says, a quavering edge to her voice, a hint of panicky excitement. Are you judging me then? BC asks her defensively. Maybe I've made up for what I've done. I did it all in the name of God anyway. You don't believe that, do you? Ruth challenges him. You never did you? Neither do I. You did it because it was fun. You didn't really believe in what you were doing. How true is that? It is sort of true on some level, to some degree, isn't it? Where is my security? I was an instrument of God, BC tells her, but his words ring hollow in his own ears. You were judge, jury, and executioner, Ruth tells him. She fixes her eyes on BC's. And so am I. She breaks her gaze. Ruth looks down at the boy. This is your son, she says, lifting her hand holding the boy's. Her other hand comes out of her jacket holding a .38 pistol. And this is a gun. She pulls the trigger. Bang! There is a stunned silence. Ruth has just shot BC in the stomach. Bang! 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 BC is on his back, on the floor of the church, and his stomach is on fire. She shot me. The boy is crying loudly, his shrieking and sobbing filling the air like a human alarm siren. BC hears the gun hit the ground beside him, hears shouting in the distance, but everything is echoing. She shot me in the gut. That's not good. He blinks. He sees Ruth standing next to the crying boy. She stares off blankly into space, arms hanging limply at her sides. The world begins to move in slow motion. BC watches his security officers rush up behind Ruth. One grabs her in a secure hold, pinning her arms and rushing her off. The other one leans over BC, kneels beside him. Prime representative. He's yelling, but to BC it sounds distorted and slowed down. BC tries to listen to him. Is that me? BC wonders out loud. He feels like sleeping. His stomach really hurts. On fire. Why can't I move? Stay with me, Prime Representative, the man yells. But BC sees the walls fall away and finds himself in a gray place, floating on a still, calm, silent sea. He's floating away, floating up, away from his body, floating across the still, calm sea, floating away. The voice of love speaks. You just never know, do you? I can hear you again. Jesus? Or, since that name's been abused, is it Ted? Ha! You remember. Still have your sense of humor, do you? That's good. Names are not important. I knew you weren't Dolomay. He's dead. Yes, he is. And he is not me. But now you are. Wait, I am? I'm you? You mean this is it? This is it. Are you with me? Yeah, I'm with you. Epilogue. From the first address to the Solar Alliance Congress by Prime Representative Anita Capituna. This was her first public appearance after her election in November of 2112. I cannot finish today without mentioning the man who isn't here with us today, a man I grew to love, despite his many faults, Bernard Campion, leader, pope, assassin, scoundrel, and a man with a very big heart. None of us would even be here today without him, even though he would never have chosen to lead us. There's a Shakespeare quote from Twelfth Night about those who have greatness thrust upon them. Be not afraid of greatness. Some are born great, some achieve greatness, and some have greatness thrust upon them. Actually, in the context of the play itself, it's not a very flattering quote, really, when you analyze its origins,
But BC wouldn't want us flattering him anyway. He would have admitted himself that any greatness of his was certainly thrust upon him. I have to tell you all, I didn't want to be the one up here today. I never thought I'd have to be. I was sure that when we reached this point that it would be him up here in front of you, addressing you on a day like this. He earned the right to be up here. He tried to make up for his past. Thanks to the media's digging in the last few weeks since his death, we're all well aware of Bernard Campion's digressions. We all know what his faults were. But he rallied us, all humanity, to face the Eldred, even after they had tried to wipe us out with their disease. Even as they assaulted us head-on, he made sure we stood up to them, and he made sure we won. Humanity survived, and now we reach for the stars, united by our humanity. Bernard Campion had a lot to do with getting us here with his vision for the Solar Alliance. I am proud to be a part of carrying out that vision, or carrying on where he left off, a vision that is helping to carry us into the stars. We are joining the greater interstellar community of races that travel among the stars, not as a reborn version of the ancient enemy, but as a friend, an ally, a trading partner, a force for good among the alien races who now seek to find their way among the stars without the guidance of the Eldred. Truly we should mourn the demise of the Eldred. But how much? Theirs was a race whose time had come and gone. They held the interstellar community in a kind of stasis for 1,000,000 years, much as they held on to Dolomay. Perhaps it was their time to move on. But I don't want to dwell on the past. We have too much to do, too much of the future to build to keep looking back. I wish BC was here to help us build that future, because it is thanks to him that we even have a future to build. I have heard the voices of those who would write him off, who would say his past just caught up with him, that he died as he lived. I can only hope, for their own sakes, that their pasts never catch up with them. For my part, I will treasure the good that BC did, as I try to do my part to help lead us into the future he envisioned. I thank you all for your faith in me to carry us forward. The end.
That was the Epilogue and Chapter 23, the end of Vatican Abdicator and the end of the Vatican Assassin Trilogy on Glow in the Dark Radio. Kind of a final end, but one of my beta readers way back when, who was finishing off Vatican Abdicator, said, well, I hope we get books with Alibi Jones, his son, in them next. And I was like, oh, well, I guess we should. And it kind of took off from there. And so we are going to take off from there and go into some Alibi Jones next. The very first Alibi Jones short story, Father's Day, is really a sort of Rashomon-like retelling of the chapter you just heard, chapter 23 of Vatican Abdicator. Although it's from Alibi's point of view and his mother's. So it's kind of, like I say, a Rashomon turnaround version of what we just heard. So we've got that coming up next week. And Blind Eye, the chronologically first Alibi Jones short story, which is actually a comic book adventure that was adapted into a prose short story. So that is on the way as we get into the adventures of Alibi Jones, the Chronological Omnibus, on our next episode. That does mean it's going to be a huge episode, because Father's Day is about 10 minutes, and Blind Eye the story is about 33. So yeah, big episode next week as we begin the adventures of Alibi Jones' Chronological Omnibus. Help spread the word, too, if you can, next week. Just please let people know this is a good jumping on place. Your word of mouth is my only real marketing and promotion, so thank you. And whatever you can do to help is appreciated. Speaking of people who help, patrons. Patrons rock. You rock. If you're a patron, you know. You help me out here. And you will be getting new Alibi Jones before anyone else. I'm hoping to get that to you relatively soon. I've been writing and rewriting the opening of the book. I'm not happy with it yet, but going in a different direction slightly, and I like the direction, so that's a good thing. But yeah, I do hope to bring patrons some new Alibi Jones before anyone else as a thank you for supporting this podcast and my science fiction efforts. You know, it is the 15th anniversary of Alibi Jones. The original paperback came out in June of 2009. The original Kindle version came out at the end of September 2009. So we are like right smack dab in the middle of the anniversary of the release of Alibi Jones. Now, I'm not making a big deal out of Alibi Jones's 15th anniversary the way I did with Vatican Assassin because, Vatican Assassin was the very first novel that I put out. I only have one first. Vatican Assassin 15th Anniversary Edition was different and kind of special. But still, I do have a new Alibi Jones audiobook coming out. Now available. Although, it's previously available material. But yes, you can get it now. The Adventures of Alibi Jones Chronological Omnibus is now available as an audiobook. 44 plus hours worth. And we're going to dive into it beginning next week on Glow in the Dark Radio. That's all for this week, and for the Vatican Assassin Trilogy. I'm your host, your writer and reader, Mike Luoma. Thank you again for listening to Glow in the Dark Radio. Glow in the Dark Radio. This podcast presentation is copyright 2023 by Michael F. Luoma and is protected under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. CC by NCND 4.0. Music by Kevin MacLeod. You can find his work at Incompetech.com. Mike's books are available in ebook, paperback, and audiobook, wherever you find books online. Get links and more details at glowinthedarkradio.com and mikeluoma.com. This has been a presentation of Glow in the Dark Radio.